and I am the director for the Rural Safety Center. We thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to go through the poll questions real quick before we get started. It looks like we have about 23% of people joining us from state DOT, 38% from local DOT, just a few people, 2% from federal DOT. We have 4% from tribal agencies, 2% from LTAPs, 7% from other federal, state, or local government agencies, 4% from universities, and 18% from private consultants. Today we have about 19% joining us from the Northeast, 17% from the Southeast, 26% from Midwest, 34% from the West, and 3% from other. Most of you are joining us computer only. If you do have any audio issues, please feel free to put those in the chat pod. But as a good backup, if you do have audio issues, we would ask that you to call in. The phone number can be found in the top left hand of your screen. And it does look like we are back to having a few of you joining us together in a conference room. If that is the case and you would like to receive our survey today in order to apply for certificates and CEUs, please send an email to info@ruralsafetycenter.org with your names and email addresses if you did not all register separately, and we'll make sure that you receive that. I'm going to go ahead and move us over to our presentation screen now. Okay, and Dana, it does sound like there's a sound echo going on. Are you hearing that, or are we okay?
No, I'm not hearing it at all. I was just replying to Mike that he may try to just join the audio via the phone, as you mentioned. I'm not hearing an echo right now.
All right. So for today's webinar, this is part 4, Safe Speeds. It's a 6-part webinar series that we are conducting here at the National Center for Rural Road Safety on improving rural road safety with the Safe System approach. You can find all of our other portions of this webinar series archived on our website if you're interested in watching those recordings if you haven't joined us already. A few webinar logistics for you. The webinar will be an hour-and-a-half long. It is being recorded in order for us to be able to archive it on our website. For quality of that recording, all phone lines have been muted other than our presenters. In order to ask questions, you can put those in the left-hand side in the chat pod. And we will stop at the end of each presentation. So we'll have 2 question and answer periods at the end of each section, and I will read those questions out. There's also a handout pod that you can find at the bottom of the screen in the left-hand corner. This has a PDF of today's webinar so that you can have access to those links. And I'm hearing, okay. I'm sorry, I'm seeing that there is and is not some echoes, so I am wondering if I should fix my sound before I continue. Hold on one second, please. Okay, I'm going to try this. Dana, can you still hear me okay?
I can hear you. You're not as crisp. It sounds a little muffled. Unfortunately, I did not hear you cutting in or out. This seems to be random. I'm not seeing a good pattern here, but the phone may be the best option for those that are having trouble.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on, and we will have the recording again, and hopefully once the speakers start, it will sound better as well. So again, just a reminder, in the bottom left-hand corner is that handout for today's presentation. As I mentioned, we're going to go through quite a few resources, and all of the links for those resources can be found in that handout, so it might be a great thing to download. Additionally, the link for the survey that I mentioned that will be emailed out directly after today's webinar can be found in that handout as well. In addition, I did want to point out in the top right-hand corner there is a box. You can see that in the top of our slide right now as well. If you click that, it will make your screen full screen. There are going to be a couple of charts that will be showed today. In case you do want to see those full screen to be able to see them a little bit more clearly, you would just click that button. If you click it again, it will then bring you back to the normal screen that you're seeing currently. Additionally, if you are listening by phone, we would ask that you please mute your computer. Otherwise, you may hear some feedback or echoing. So just remember to do that as well if you're joining us by phone. Additionally, as I mentioned, you can fill out that survey to request certificates of completion and CEUs. Surveys do close 2 weeks after the webinar, and you can expect these certificates about 4 to 6 weeks after the webinar. The CEU form needs to be returned to the university and not the Rural Safety Center. You can also send an email to continuinged@montana.edu to request a verification of completion form. That verification of completion form will show you all of the CEUs that you've ever received from the Rural Safety Center, including from our summits and our webinars and some of our Road Safety Champion Program trainings. Additionally, I would like to point out as well that CEUs are what universities tend to give out as their credentials. However, these do translate into PDHs that many engineers will need. For today's presenters, we're lucky enough to have 2 presenters from the Texas Transportation Institute at Texas A&M University. Our first will be Kay Fitzpatrick. She is a senior research engineer with Texas A&M's Transportation Institute. Her research interests include pedestrian treatments, roadway geometric design, traffic control devices, roadway safety, and the effects of posted speed limits on safety and operations. Her work has influenced changes in TxDOT Roadway Design Manual, FHWA's MUTCD, and the AASHTO Green Book. Additionally, we have Darren Torbic with us. He is a research scientist with Texas A&M's Transportation Institute as well. He has over 27 years of research experience in the areas of highway safety, geometric design, traffic engineering, and pedestrian and bicycle transportation. He has served as the principal investigator on numerous research projects for NCHRP, FHWA, and AASHTO. Dr. Torbic is the author or co-author on over 70 technical papers or research reports, several of which are referenced in the first edition of the Highway Safety Manual and the 2018 Green Book. And we're super excited to have them both here to talk to us today about speed and some of the projects that they've worked on. Once you've completed today's webinar, you'll have an understanding of the safe speed element and the safe system approach through the lens of actions that agencies can take. To achieve this webinar goal, you will learn to explain the steps for setting a posted speed limit, to name the key elements to consider when setting a posted speed limit, and list design treatments for rural high-speed to low-speed transition zones. So really quick before we get started, I just wanted to run through a few of the beginning pieces for the safe system approach in case you haven't joined us for the previous webinars that we've been doing. So currently, our main goal is to get us to zero fatalities and serious injuries. We want to make sure that everyone in the United States gets home safely every day whenever they travel outside of their area. And so how we do this is by using the framework of the safe system approach. And we do this through a foundation of safety culture. And that traffic safety culture are the beliefs we share with other people and our social groups that influence driving decisions. So we really need to approach all of this with a safety mindset. So let's dig a little bit further into that safe system approach framework. It's a holistic approach that looks at aiming to eliminate the fatal and serious injuries for all road users, and it does this through 6 principles. That death and serious injury is unacceptable, that humans make mistakes, that humans are vulnerable, that responsibility is shared, safety is proactive, and redundancy is crucial. And it does this through 5 elements or layers of protection. And so far we have gone through several of these in our webinar series so far, safe road users and safe vehicles. Today we're going to focus on safe speeds. And then next month we will do safe roads. And finally in December we will talk about post-crash care. When we start talking about safe speeds, we do know that there's a direct link between safe speeds and the ability to survive a crash. we talked a little bit about that principle of human injury tolerance. And so we do know that reducing speed accommodates this human injury tolerance by reducing impact forces, providing additional time for drivers to stop, and improving visibility. But we also know that the safe system approach is not about universally reducing speeds. It's about making sure that the speed is appropriate for the road conditions that exist, both the infrastructure in the road as well as the conditions such as weather. So we need to make sure that we're also designing our roadways to meet user expectancies. So we have self-explaining roads and self-enforcing roads. And these are ones that look similar even if it's not the same location. So if you see the pictures over on the right-hand side, if we do have roads that look similar, we need to make sure that they have design consistency, their lane widths are similar, their shoulders, markings, and even speed. But we also have visual cues that would let people know. So for example, most of us, if we see the large changeable message signs on an interstate, would think urban. So if you put that very large overhead changeable message sign in a rural area, it's a very different visual cue and may not have design consistency. Hence why in rural areas you tend to see the ones that are smaller on the side of the road and even maybe portable changeable message signs as one example. Some roads, as you see in that picture on the right-hand side, are engineered to accommodate those higher speeds with very large clear zones over on the side of the road with large shoulders. They're very flat, but others are not engineered to accommodate those higher speeds. And so that's what we talk about self-enforcing and self-explaining. When the roads are smaller width, don't have as many clear zones on the side, your expectancy as a driver when you see a crosswalk is knowing that pedestrians are going to be there and your speed should be slower. And so today I'm very excited to have Kay talk to us about how to set speed limits, and then Darren talk to us about some of these countermeasures that we can put in to make sure that our roadways are self-explaining and self-enforcing. And specifically, Darren's going to talk about those high-speed to low-speed transitions that we tend to see in rural areas when we have a high-speed roadway then become a main street in a rural area and what we can do for that. And so first, before we get started with K's, I'm going to ask you all a poll question and find out how many of you may have previously heard of the NCHRP 17-76 speed setting tool. Okay, so it looks like most people have now voted, and it looks like about 34% of you have heard of it, but about 2/3 of you have not yet heard about it. So I'm glad that Kay is going to be able to provide some information for those of you who have not yet heard about it and hopefully be able to answer some additional questions for those of you who have heard about it that you may have. So at this time, I'm going to turn our presentation over to Kay.
Thanks. This slide shows the questions that you will be asked at the end, questions on setting of posted speed limits, and then the elements to consider when going through that process. I'm going to talk about a NCHRP project, NCHRP 1776. I was the principal investigator, but I do want to recognize that we had quite a large team that worked on this project, and you can see their names here on this slide. 1776 had two broad objectives. The first objective was to gain an understanding of what influences operating speeds. And we looked at all types of roads, and the documentation of those research efforts are in a web-only report that's available from NCHRP if you're interested. At my final slide in my presentation will give you the link to both of these reports that you see listed here, along with a link to the tool that we developed. The big objective for 1776 was to develop that guidance on setting of speed limits
and to develop a tool that was spreadsheet-based that automates the guidance that we had established. And so the tool and the guide, as I said, is available on the NCHRP website. And eventually the guide will be published in a hard copy. So we started this project a while ago, and one of the things we looked for was what is the advice available for the setting of posted speed limits. Overall, the prime reference that is being used is the MUTCD, the Manual and Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And basically it talks about doing a traffic study that uses 85th percentile speed of free-flowing traffic along with consideration of other factors. So it's not just a one-to-one, it's not only 85th, there are a number of other factors that are listed and discussed in the MUTCD. And I know from survey of practitioners that folks are considering a number of other factors instead of only the 85th, as there's been some criticism made. There are also several other resources available. FHWA has a lot of information on their website, along with the Institute of Transportation Engineers, ITE. There are some states that have their own procedures, Texas being one of them. And NACTO is a group that has come out very, has spent a lot of energy in the recent years in promoting their recommendations on how to set speed limits. And I sometimes joke that speed limits is somewhat cyclic. There are some years when it's a concern, but it doesn't seem to be a major topic on a national level. In 2017, it reached a peak. There was a lot of discussion about the setting of speed limits, especially with respect to that 85th percentile concept. And there were two publications, one by NACTO that said state laws should be repealed if they talk about 85th percentile, and the National Transportation Safety Board published their report that recommended removing guidance that dealt with 85th percentile speed within the MUTCD. The NTSB report also made a number of other recommendations with respect to speeding. There were several state initiatives. Oregon and California are two examples there. Several cities obtained the rights to set citywide speed limits. So we're now seeing a similar speed limit on all city streets within Boston and Portland and Seattle and Austin. And so they are starting to report some of their findings of what operating speed changes are occurring on these city streets that now have the same speed limit. Last year, NACTO did release their report that says this is how you should be setting speed limits on city streets. So all of this has been going on while the research team was working on 1776. So quite a number of national level discussions. The volunteer group that provides advice to FHWA on the Manual and Uniform Traffic Control Device is a group called the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. That's NCUTCD's abbreviation up there. And so the National Committee formed a task force to look at those recommendations that NTSB made. Lots and lots of history and discussions and details. If you want more information on that, you can send me an email. I will say that we will probably see some changes in the speed limit material that's contained in the Manual and Uniform Traffic Control Device during the next edition. When that next edition is coming out is not known to me and probably to many folks. There's a lot going on with respect to the next edition on the manual. But I think we will see some changes with respect to speed limits. That task force, which I participated on, asked this question, which had a big impact, in my opinion, on how we proceeded with 1776. And that question was, how would you set the speed limit if you had a choice? And half of our participants to that survey said they would set it other than one of our established responses, which all dealt with 85th or some pace or some percentile speed. And the word cloud that you see on the right really emphasized that the participants feel that we should be setting speed limits with respect to the context of the road. And that's one of my big takeaways for you from this presentation, is that when we're talking speed limits, we should be talking the context of the road. In my opinion, we should be setting speed limits differently on freeways than we do on city streets. And that's integrated into the 1776 protocol through the use of decision rules. By having decision rules that are sensitive to the context of the roadway, we can generate results that are consistent from site to site because they're using the same set of decision rules. We had other guiding principles in developing our protocol. You can see them listed here. We wanted we wanted you to have the ability to kind of see how the decisions are being made, to avoid that black box type of feel where you don't know why a software is recommending a particular suggested speed limit. We also wanted our tool, why it's sensitive to the roadway context, we wanted it to all be in one package. So I have said several times that I think the setting of speed limits should be sensitive to context. And what I mean by that is shown on this slide. If you're about my age, then you're very familiar with the rural and urban development levels and the introduction of suburban as a roadway type. Within the past few years in a different NCHRP project, the recommendation was that we should have more than just rural and urban and suburban, that we should also be considering our roadway designs with respect to the rural town and the urban core context. And there is ongoing discussion of maybe adding more context levels, but at the time that we created the 1776 report, we had these 5. The roadway types, you're probably pretty familiar with. They've been around for a long time: freeways, arterials, collectors, and such. And so in this matrix, we have 5 contexts, 5 types, so that gives us 25 cells. And the research team started to develop decision rules for each of those 25 cells. And as we started that development, we realized that there's some similarities. And so we developed these 4 speed limit setting groups. So we have a set of decision rules for limited access, full access, undeveloped, and developed speed limit setting groups. So within the 1776 procedure, you start with identifying that roadway context and type, which puts you in one of those 4 speed limit setting groups, which then directs you to a unique set of decision rules. Now, those decision rules are a function of speed distribution. Some people call that 85th percentile. 85th percentile is a measure of the speed distribution. We are also using more than just the 85th percentile speed distribution within our decision rules. We then incorporate safety in 2 ways. One is the actual crash rate on that segment is considered and is compared to national average, or you can compare it to your state average. And we also consider safety in terms of the known relationships. For example, there's quite a bit in the Highway Safety Manual where we know the relationship between shoulder width and crashes, and so we integrated that into the speed limit setting procedure. And coming out of those decision rules would be the suggested speed limit. Let me emphasize the word suggested in that this is a tool. 1776 is a tool that helps you in the process of setting speed limits. Once you have the suggested speed limit, then it's your agency, right, that sets the policy. So the big question is, well, how did we develop our decision rules? We started with what we know from the literature and from key reference documents. I've already mentioned the Highway Safety Manual, which gives us knowledge of the relationship between roadway characteristics and safety. And then there's a whole lot of research literature that's happened since the publication of the Highway Safety Manual. There is knowledge of references or relationships from, say, the AASHTO Green Book. We also used the expert opinions of the research team members and the project panel. Within the 1776 project, we did have some funds available for original research, and so we recommended to the panel that we focus those dollars on the suburban-urban environment because of a lack of research in those areas. They supported that recommendation, and so we developed two databases, one for Austin, Texas data, and one from Washtenaw County, Michigan data. So that's in Ann Arbor area, or the county that includes Ann Arbor, Michigan. Because we're interested in understanding the relationship between speed and crashes, we focused on mid-block crashes or non-intersection crashes, depending upon the terminology used in that state. We felt that the intersections that are controlled by traffic control, like signals or all-way stops, are being heavily influenced by that traffic control. And so we decided to pull those crashes out and just focus on the mid-block crashes. In Washtenaw County, Michigan, we had over 300 miles of roadway segments. We took out all of the freeways and local streets and just focused on the collectors and arterials with a posted speed limit between 25 and 50 miles per hour. The Austin, Texas database was similar in size. We had another about 300 miles worth of data. Now, a bonus of the Austin data was that we had actual operating speeds on the 305 miles of roadway, over 660 segments. Most of those, several of those traffic counts were done on local roads where the citizens may have called in a concern about speeding, and the city went out and measured speed. And they had consolidated all of that data into one database, which was a very, very rich find for this study. We have a lot of speed data out there. We have probe data, but for it to be of the quality that you need for research is pretty rare. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to have this Austin data for looking at the relationship between speed and crashes. We had some funds for original data collection, which we did in Austin, primarily on the higher speed 4-lane roads, since that part of the database wasn't as populated. So there's lots and lots of additional details on the analysis that we did in Michigan and Austin. I want to just pull out this one in the interest of time. In the analysis, we used the number of crashes on that segment, and we had an appreciation for the exposure or the volume. This graph combines that information into a crash rate. So if you have a statistical background, we did not use crash rate. In the statistical analysis, we did use number of crashes, ADT, and segment length. But for this illustration purposes, we combined all of that and put it together as a crash rate. Because we had actual speeds for our segments, we were able to explore a number of additional speed measures than just having posted speed limit be the surrogate for operating speeds. We looked at a dozen or so different speed measures: posted speed, average speed, 85th percentile speed, pace, standard deviation, and we could look at combinations like the difference between posted speed and average speed. And out of all of those measures, I think the posted speed minus average speed measure provided us the best insight or understanding of the relationship. And what it is that when posted speed is close to the average speed in the suburban urban environment, we're seeing the lowest crash rates. So 0 plus or minus 5 miles per hour is kind of where that trend line is at the minimum. This finding provides us the justification for including 50th percentile speed as a way to look at selecting your posted speed limit. So that research had an impact on decision rules in different areas. I mentioned the final bullet point on this slide about using what we found in Austin to help justify using the 50th percentile speed. We also saw that traffic signal density and access density are very critical variables with respect to the relationship between operations and safety. We also see evidence for including median type in the presence of on-street parking. So once we had developed that protocol, those decision rules, our next step was to develop that tool. We were instructed by the panel that it needed to be spreadsheet based, which we were totally fine with because TTI has done a number of spreadsheet tools. I had as one of my goals is to have all of the data on one screen. I think it really helps if you don't have to be bouncing between different locations looking at your inputs to try to understand what your output is giving you. And in addition, we wanted to use color to help with the process so that if you type in 120 feet instead of 12 feet for your lane width, a warning message will pop up, and that will be in red to indicate to you that this is something you need to correct. So this is a screenshot of our tool, at least the top half of the tool. This is just the clipping from a limited access example or a freeway example. You can see in the top right corner that we explain the colors that we use for the various cells so that you have an idea of which ones you can ignore because it's an optional input cell like the date of your study and description and such, and which cells you should not change, the red base rows or purple cells that are part of calculations. You can also see on the right side in the circle our advisory note that we created to go with that suggested speed limit so that you understand which group of data influenced that decision. In this case, it was the speed data that was entered along with site characteristics, So what that tells me here is that crashes was not influential in setting the suggested speed limit. Here's the bottom half of that view where how site characteristics influence that suggested speed limit is because of the assumed, the value of 2 foot being the inside shoulder width. That's a little more narrow than optimal, and so that results in a suggested speed limit that's lower. Because this is a research project, we did come up with some other research needs. I feel like we have some very interesting findings from the Austin data, but I think we need to replicate that insight using other cities' data so that we have a better picture of how the roadway characteristics along with the posted speed limit is influencing the safety on the road. There is decision rules for the developed and the full access speed limit setting groups that are sensitive to peds and bikes. It is sensitive to the ped and bike activity level, which volume, separate from being sensitive to the ped and bike infrastructure, such as sidewalk presence and bike lane types. The criteria that we used in our decision rules was based primarily on our expert opinions because there's not a lot of research available about those relationships. So that's an area that definitely needs a lot more research. There are a number of different approaches to setting speed limits, especially for city streets nowadays, and we need a study that looks at these different methods and identify which are the most effective, both in terms of speed and in terms of safety. This 1776 provides you with a recommendation for the number on the sign, for those numbers that's written in black on a white sign. It is critical that we get a defendable and reasonable approach to setting the number on that sign. But just changing the number on that sign is not going to have as big of a shift on operating speeds as we would like. I think we all have stories of citizens that say, hey, change the speed limit from 40 to 30 and we're going to solve all of the problems. And I think we all know that that's not true, that we need other methods to manage speeds, whether they be enforcement or education or roadway design. But we need an understanding of how all of those different speed management techniques work and what's the most successful within certain roadway types and contexts. So I feel like we definitely need to have a better toolbox available. So this is my final slide. This is the location for where you can obtain the research report, which is really big and probably mainly of interest to other researchers. What you're probably most interested in would be that user guide and then the tools. There's 2 links for the tools. The top one is the macro-enabled version. For those agencies that cannot download a macro-enabled version of the tool, we also created a without macro version. It's not as elegant in terms of how it presents some of the findings because we don't have the use of macros, but it will give you the exact same answer. And so with that, I think we have time for a couple of questions. So let me take a look at what's been coming in to the chat box.
Yep, so I'm going to go ahead and remind everyone that the chat pod is on the left-hand side. You can go ahead and type in any questions you may have there. We also have some poll questions before we get to your questions for Kay. Our first one is for NCHRP 1776, considering driver's speed choice, the 85th percentile speed is one of the steps in setting posted speed limits. True or false? The next one is true or false, the context of the road is a consideration in setting speed limits per NCHRP 1776. The next one is which of the following are key elements to consider when setting a posted speed limit on a roadway with the developed speed limit setting group? Roadway context, roadway type, speed distribution, safety, access density, signal density, median type, all of the above, or none of the above. And then we also have a challenge question that we like to ask in all of our Rural Safety Center webinars. From this section of the webinar, what is one action item that you'd consider implementing in your jurisdiction? We would encourage you to write it down at your desk so that you'll have that information after the webinar. But if you're also willing to share it with us, we would love to see some of your answers in this open-ended question as well. We'll give everyone just a few seconds to go ahead and fill those out, and then I will broadcast the results for Kay. And then Kay, I'll go ahead and ask you those questions in the chat pod. It does look like a few of them may require me to go backwards in the presentation to show the slide to you. Okay, so it looks like we have, people have finished with our polls, so I'm going to go ahead and broadcast all those results for you if you'd like to go ahead and address their answers, please, Kay.
Okay, there's quite a number of questions. I won't be able to get to all of them. And
Kay, can you go ahead and address the poll questions that they just did and whether or not they got the correct answers for those? Can you see them on your screen?
okay, yes. So within the questions on the true and false question, speed choice is considered within 1776 and setting of posted speed limits. And it looks like very good. People are listening. That's always nice to hear or read for a presenter. And with respect to is context. So I'm glad to see that talking point made it through. Context is a key factor within the setting of posted speed limits using the 1776 tool. Question number 4, the correct answer will be all of the above, which the majority of our participants did identify. Those that identified A, B, and D, those are considered, but along with some of the other ones. And
Perfect.
Okay.
And it looks like for our challenge question that quite a few of you are looking forward to using the tool that Kay just spoke about. But also a few of you mentioned that you do need to have some changes in state law before you're able to make any changes as well. So thank you for sharing those answers too. I am going to bring us back to the presentation because as I mentioned, it looked like a couple of these questions were regarding the presentation slides itself. Our first question for you, Kay, is aren't we required to follow the MUTCD when setting speed limits? And how do we get around that?
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to really answer that question today because it depends on your state laws and if you're in a city or a county, if you have requirements with respect to that area. There's a just cherry picking one or two more questions. there's a question about how does the 1776 tool differ from the FHWA US Limits 2 tool. I would say 1776 uses the more current knowledge. US Limits 2 is dated in that it was developed 15, 20 years ago. We did use the information within US Limits 2 and we built upon it. So there are differences between the two, but I feel like the differences are because of the profession's greater knowledge of the relationship between safety and operations and design. There is a project that is updating US Limits 2. Some people call it by shorthand US Limits 3. That's probably a few years away from finishing. I am not sure what US Limits 3 is going to look like, if they're going to stay with their web base or if they're going to go with a spreadsheet base. I do not know. And then the final question I'll answer so that I give Darren enough time was, why did we only use experts' opinions on the PED bike issues rather than including the guidance in the Highway Safety Manual? We did use the guidance that's available in the Highway Safety Manual and in some current research or recent research on ped and bike and safety. We definitely are trying to use what we have available. It's just rather limited. And this is an area where I think we need more research so that we understand how the sidewalk infrastructure, for example, can the sidewalk be attached to the curb, or should we always have a buffer strip? Or is it okay to have it attached to the curb if the sidewalk is wider, say 8 feet instead of 5 feet? There's a lot of infrastructure questions that I think we just need better insights on that. And I believe someone else also noted that when they pick undeveloped speed limit setting group, there are no questions about peds and bikes. And that's because of the current knowledge is just not there in terms of how to deal with the peds and bikes in rural areas. Another huge challenge. So with that, I will turn the control back to you, Jamie.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And so, Kay, if you do have time and you're able to answer some of those other questions in the chat pod, or if we have time at the end after Darren's presented, we can come back to a few more of those as well. And now at this time, I'm going to have Darren unmute, and we'll ask him to please present on the design treatments for rural high-speed to low-speed transition zones.
All right. Thank you very much. And yeah, I guess one of the, at the end of the presentation, hopefully you can list some of the design treatments for rural high-speed to low-speed transition zones. And today I'll be talking about a project, NCHRP Project 1540, the design guidance for high to low-speed transition zones for rural highways. I guess unlike Kay's presentation on a project that recently completed, this project goes back a few years. It was completed in roughly 2012, and the research results are published in NCHRP Report 737, Design Guidance for High to Low Speed Transition Zones for Rural Highways. In the presentation, I'll go over the objectives and scope of the project, touch on key findings from NCHRP Synthesis 412, which was a predecessor to our work to the project, and addressed treatments for transition zones. And then I'll discuss some field studies that we conducted as part of the research, and then the design guidance that was developed as part of the project, and then talk how the design guidance relates to safe systems. The objectives of 1540 were to quantify the effectiveness of treatments to reduce driver speeds in high to low speed transition zones, and then develop guidance for selecting effective treatments for those transition zones, particularly rural highways entering the communities. With the focus or the scope, our focus was to look at the transition zones, but we also needed to consider speeds of vehicles traveling through that low-speed environment or the community area. And we also were charged to focus on engineering treatment. So we were not to address other types of speed management components, the driver education programs, enforcement programs, and then also build on the results published in the synthesis report 412, which is speed reduction techniques for rural to high speed, rural high to low speed transitions. And here are some of the key findings from the synthesis reports, and you'll see these sort of addressed also in the findings and recommendations and design guidance from our project. But there are 4 key findings. One, more extensive and aggressive treatments tend to produce greater reductions in speed and crash occurrence than less extensive and passive treatments. A distinct relationship between a community speed limit and a change in the roadway character is needed to affect driver behavior. There's no particular treatment that is appropriate for all situations. Each community must be assessed and treated based upon its own characteristics. And then it's necessary to provide additional measures through the community to maintain a speed reduction through at the downstream end of the transition zone. So looking at the field studies that we completed as part of the research, we evaluated the effectiveness of 3 treatments in reducing speeds through the transition zone in the community. We looked at roundabouts, transverse pavement markings, and welcome signs at the community entrance. So we did the operational analysis looking at the speed data, and also conducted a crash analysis. With the speed studies, we collected data at 22 treatment and non-treatment locations. We installed traffic classifiers at the upstream end of the transition zone, so where the C located on the figure here. We also installed classifiers on the downstream end of the transition zone, so location B. And then somewhere located within the community, we installed classifiers and collected speed in that low speed region. So we had speed at specific locations at the upstream and downstream end, and then in the community. And then we also, using laser guns, we collected speeds throughout the transition zone itself, and we're able to develop speed profiles. And for each of the locations, we developed these speed profiles, and here this is just one location, and one of the sites where we collected speed data. In this situation, it was a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit in the rural area, and then a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit in the community. And so there was a speed ahead sign, 45-mile-an-hour sign, and then it dropped down to 30-mile-an-hour ahead speed sign, and then 30 miles an hour in the community. And you can see we've got the speeds at the upstream end, downstream end of the transition zone, and at the community from the classifier, and then the speed profile using the laser gun data. And that TPM is where the treatment in this case was installed. And so we looked at the profiles for each of the locations where we collected speed data, and the key measures of interest or primary measures of interest that we were looking at for the operational analysis was the transition zone exit speed. We focused on the percentage of vehicles in compliance with the speed limits at the end of the transition zone and the percentage of vehicles exceeding the speed limits by 5 miles an hour. We also were interested in the transition zone speed reduction, so the difference in the mean speeds upstream and downstream of the transition zone, and then the speed through the community, and basically the percentage of vehicles in compliance with the posted speed limits or the speed limit plus 5 miles an hour within the community. And focusing, for the operational analysis, we use logistical regression to compare the effects of the treatments versus the non-treatments, and we accounted for differences in the posted speed limits at each of the locations, and also the differences in the site characteristics, looking at on-street parking, presence of sidewalks, curbs, horizontal alignment, and a few other site characteristics. Looking at the primary results from the operation analysis and the safety study, we found that roundabouts and transverse pavement markings increase the rate of compliance of vehicles traveling at or below the speed limit at the end of the transition zone by 15 and 20% respectively, compared to no treatment. Roundabouts increase the rate of compliance of vehicles traveling within 5 miles an hour of the speed limit at the end of the transition zone by 11% compared to no treatment. The findings support the need to provide additional measures through the community to maintain that speed reduction downstream of the transition zone. And we didn't see, there wasn't any evidence that any of the treatments either improved or negatively impacted safety at the locations, the treatment locations. In terms of the design guidance, so we took the results from the field studies that we collected, information from the synthesis report, and other literature that we gathered on transition zones, and developed design guidance for selecting appropriate treatments for the transition zones. And there was a range of topics that we discussed in the guidance, but I want to touch on 4 here. Definitions of the transition zone study area, methods to assess the need for 1 or more transition zone treatments, guiding principles for transition zone design, and then a catalog of transition zone treatments that were included in the guidance. And so I'll talk about each of these points. In terms of we developed a definition for the transition zone area. We wanted to make sure for the design guidance, everybody's talking the same language. One of the key points to impress upon everyone is a transition zone is not a point location along the roadway. It's a length of roadway segments, and in defining it, we define 2 areas within the transition zone: a perception reaction area on the upstream end, and then a deceleration area on the downstream end. In the perception reaction area, drivers are made aware of impending need to change speed in their driving behavior. Physical and operational characteristics in that perception reaction area are similar to the rural zone upstream, and some deceleration may occur in the perception reaction area, but it's not absolutely necessary. And then in the deceleration area, this is where drivers are expected to decelerate to safe speeds entering the community. The roadway and roadside characteristics, land use, access generally change, and then in this area may include physical measures to reinforce the need for speed transition. also want to indicate that transition zones are unique compared to other portions of the roadway. Typically, design continuity is important and abrupt changes in design are avoided, but with transition zones, the roadway design necessarily changes. It needs to change in order for drivers to change their behaviors, and then drivers are expected to change their behaviors to match the new conditions. When assessing the need for a treatment in a transition zone area or trying to determine whether the transition zone area is working properly, there are a range of elements that need to be considered. You need to look at speeds, crashes, access points, land use, the roadway, the alignment, the vertical, horizontal alignment, the traffic volume, the types of vehicles, whether bikes and pedestrians are present. You need to look at transit, the traffic control devices, the roadway design elements, the roadside design elements, parking, and also whether current transition zone treatments are installed. So in terms of trying to make an assessment of the need for an improvement or a project, there's a range of elements that need to be considered. As part of the project, we developed a methodology to make that assessment of the need for an improvement, and we defined a 6-step process where you define the study area, identify the current transition zone boundaries, conduct a speed study, a crash analysis, define the theoretical transition zone boundaries, and then the final step is making that decision. And I'll hit on each of these steps here. So with step 1 of the methodology, you define the study area and the reference system. So you define the geographical extents of the study area. And they extend from the rural zone into the community. You select the reference points for all the measurements. Step 2, identify the current transition zone boundaries based upon locations of the speed limit signs and advanced warning signs. And the boundaries can be set based upon when signs become visible to the drivers. Step 3 is conduct a speed limits compliance test. So obtain speed data at key locations and create the speed profiles. Compute mean and 85th percentile operating speeds and compare those to the posted speed limits. Conduct a crash analysis. We collect most recent 3 to 5 years of available crash data. Qualitatively analyze the data to see if speed is a contributing factor in any of the crashes. Conduct a quantitative analysis using methodologies such as those in the HSM, and then check the correlation between the crash analysis and the speed studies. Then the 5th step is define the theoretical transition zone boundaries. So those theoretical boundaries are based upon the community and the roadway characteristics, and the deceleration distances appropriate for the speed change. Compare the transition zone boundaries from step 2 to the theoretical boundaries, and then that final step is to look at the results of the speed study and the crash analysis to see if there's any indication whether speed reduction treatments are needed, and incorporating additional data is necessary on selecting one or more potential transition zone treatments. As part of the project, we did create a straight line diagram tool. It's a spreadsheet tool where you can input information on speed, crashes, access points, land use, horizontal and vertical alignments, traffic volume, to be able to gather all the information in one location to make an assessment of whether the need for one or more treatments. So turning to the guiding principles that for transition zone design that were developed, again, trying to build on what was identified in the synthesis reports. So we've got, again, more extensive and aggressive treatments tend to produce greater reductions in speed and crash occurrence than the less extensive and passive treatments. There needs to be a distinct relationship between the community speed limit and a change in the roadway character, emphasizing that a change in the environment increases awareness for that speed change needed. Physical changes to the roadway and roadside are favored treatments because they have permanent and lasting effects. Impacts of enforcement and educational programs are more transient and less effective. Each transition zone and community has its own unique characteristics, so no one transition zone treatment is appropriate for all situations, and each transition zone and community really should be assessed on a case-by-case basis to determine in selecting a treatment or combination of treatments for a given context. Additionally, before selecting a treatment, consideration should be given to the two areas that make up the transition zone. So in your perception reaction area, you want to install warning or psychological treatments. And then in the deceleration area, that's where you're looking to install the physical treatments. Then combinations of treatments are more effective at reducing speeds than a single treatment. To maintain a speed reduction downstream of the transition zone, it's necessary to provide additional treatments within the community. Otherwise, you might expect speeds to increase in the community area. And also, it's appropriate use of landscaping elements such as grass, shrubs, and trees, which change in composition and degree of formality along the length of the transition zone can reinforce the changing characteristics of the environment. And consideration should be given to prohibiting passing within the transition zone. So we felt that these are the primary points, again, sort of taking information from the synthesis 412 and then combining the results from the operational and safety analysis that were conducted as part of our research. In terms of the catalog, we identified those treatments that we felt were most practical and or effective for use in high to low speed transition zones. The catalog includes treatments that geometric design elements, traffic control devices, pavement surface treatments, roadside treatments, and the catalog and the guidance is not meant to be exhaustive, but it was those that we felt are most practical and effective in reducing speeds. Here is a sample format of the information that's presented in the catalog. So for each treatment, there's a description of the treatment, the effectiveness of the treatment in terms of either reducing speeds and or the safety impacts of the treatment. There's information on cost, potential contraindications, and then information on the installation location of the treatment. This is just a sample format of the information that's presented for each treatment included in the catalog. Here's 4 geometric design elements that are included in the catalog. So it includes center islands or raised islands, roadway narrowing, roundabouts, and road diets as the geometric design elements. as the traffic control devices. It includes information on transverse pavement markings and speed-activated feedback signs. The surface treatments include transverse rumble strips and colored pavement. And then the roadside treatments include welcome signs and layered landscaping. Turning to how these design guidelines or guidance relate to the safe systems approach. With safe systems principles, you've got your six principles on safe systems, and essentially the guidance is consistent with at least two of these principles. Safety is proactive. You can use the defined methodology to identify the need for transition zone treatments before crashes occur. The methodology includes a crash analysis or a safety analysis, but even if zero crashes occur and you see that speeds aren't consistent with what's expected or desired to the community, you can still take a proactive approach to implementing a treatment without crashes occurring. The next one might be a little stretch. Redundancy is crucial, but sort of wanted to impress upon that combinations of treatments are more effective than a single treatment. So you don't want to install just one treatment and think that that's going to be effective in reducing speeds. It's really a combination of treatments, so some type of level of redundancy in your approach to reducing speeds through the transition zone. And then here you've got your 5 safe system elements. And again, the guidance is consistent with at least 2 of these. I mean, here we're talking safe speed. So again, the overall goal is to reduce speeds to the transition zone and community. And then with the safe roads, you want to properly design the transition zone to alert drivers to the approaching conditions to the community and other potential road users. In particular, you're anticipating that there might be additional levels, higher levels of bicyclists and pedestrians through the community. So again, trying to you've got safe speeds and safer roads here in terms of the guidance. So with that, I will end at the end of the presentation and able to take questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Darren. At this point, we are going to move over to our final poll questions for everyone, and then we'll take some questions for Darren. Again, you can put those questions that you might have over in the chat pod on the left-hand side, and we'll answer as many of them as we're able to. Our poll questions for you is, which of the following is not a design treatment for rural high-speed to low-speed transition zones? Roundabouts, transverse rumble strips, speed humps, speed feedback signs. And then we have another true or false question for you. True or false, it is necessary to provide additional measures through the community to maintain a speed reduction downstream of the transition zone. Again, we also have our challenge question from you that we'd love to hear back from you. And again, just a way to think through some of the action items you could take from this section of the webinar. What is one action item you'd consider implementing in your jurisdiction? Please write it down, and then if you'd like to share it in the poll pod, we'd love to hear those. So we'll give everyone just a few seconds to go ahead and fill these out. And I did also want to point out for everyone as well, there were some questions earlier about the US Limits update, and Scott Davis was nice enough to put that link into the chat pod for everyone if you're interested in finding out more about that. So thank you, Scott, for posting that for us. It does look like at this point that everyone has finished taking the poll. So Darren, I have broadcast those results if you'd like to address the answers, please.
Sure, yes. The first question, which of the following is not a design treatment for rural high to low speed transition zones? The correct answer is speed humps. Basically, there's most agreement that you don't really want those vertical deflections in changes in the transition zone, so speed humps was the correct answer for that. And then true or false question, it is necessary to provide additional measures through the community to maintain that speed reduction downstream of the transition zone, and the correct answer is true, which looks like most people had.
Perfect, thank you. And it does look like for our challenge question that a lot of people were very interested in those transverse rumble strips that you mentioned, also the transverse pavement markings, some roadside treatments, reviewing how the guidelines could apply to other transition speed transition areas, and then getting coworkers to watch this webinar at a later date. And for that in particular, we will have the archived version of this up on our website within the next few days, so you can look for it on the ruralsafetycenter.org website under training and archived. It also will show up on our registration page too, as it is part of, as I mentioned, a six-part webinar series, so it's also currently being listed on our registration page too. Darren, for questions for you, the first one is, did your transition zones begin at the point where drivers could see the treatments or where they physically encountered them?
We define the boundary to be where you could actually see the first indication that a transition zone was approaching. So if there was a speed ahead sign or reduction in the speed limit, so it doesn't necessarily have to occur. The treatment may actually be further down in the transition zone or down in this sort of that deceleration area versus in the perception reaction area.
Okay, and another question that came in for you too is, did your TPM have a tactile or sound component or just a visual component?
The treatments that we included in our study just had a visual perspective, so nothing tactile or sound.
There is also a comment in here that I wonder if you can talk to, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to, but it does say that landscaping along the roadway has an impact on small animals that may be entering the roadway.
That's, I would say that's probably true. That is not something that we addressed in our research in this project.
And then another question says, why was there no discussion of stepping down the speed limit incrementally while passing through transition zones? This actually works most of the time without the other transition techniques.
I agree that the step downs is important. I mean, that is not a, and I'm trying to get to the heat profile here that we, so it was given, in most cases it's, I'm not going to say it's given that there might be some type of step down in the speed limit, so that can occur, but we didn't necessarily see that that's an effective treatment in order to be able to be effective in reducing speeds through the community. And in most cases, I mean, you're still going to have that step down treatment occur, but it's not as effective as some type of physical treatment or other type of treatment.
And you did, in the poll question that we had, you addressed this answer a little bit, but there are several questions that came in right after that, so I'm going to ask those again. There is an answer in here as well, so I'll read that out for you just in case you agree or disagree with the answer that came in. But there are several people asking why you don't want to use speed humps in the transition areas as they're effective in slowing people down. And one of the answers that came in was that speed humps are for lower speeds than what we're discussing with this NCHRP project. So could you address that, please?
Yeah, so speed humps are I mean, can be used in the low speed environment, but in the high speed environments and through their transition zones, they're not recommended just because of the higher speeds.
And then I believe these questions are from the very beginning of your presentation. And there was one about when you were speaking about speeds going down, but it not affecting the crash rate. It doesn't have a slide number in here, so I'm not sure if you'll remember which slide that was, but I believe it was at the very beginning of your presentation.
And that might have just been in the results that from our study that we didn't in our analysis we didn't see that there wasn't any firm relationship between reductions in speed and whether the improvements or the treatments that we analyzed either impacted or negatively impacted speed. There simply just wasn't enough evidence to make a decision one way or the other.
This question, sorry. This question is also, I believe, about these similar slides because they're talking about roundabouts as well. So it says the rate of compliance after roundabouts not being near 90 to 100% implies to me that the roundabouts were not designed to bring vehicle speeds down to the posted speed limit at the exit. Is this true? And if not, why is the compliance rate so low after a geometric measure that requires drivers to slow?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Absolutely. It was a long question. So it is that the rate of compliance after roundabouts, because it's not near 90 to 100%, implies that roundabouts were not designed to bring vehicle speeds down to the posted speed limit at the exits. And is this true? If not, why is the compliance rate so low after a geometric measure that requires drivers to slow down? So I think it's regarding that very first bullet that says that a roundabout will bring down the speed 15 to 20%, I think, instead of what they're saying is they thought it should be 90 to 100%.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily. So if I don't think I have a good answer for that one. I mean, they're designed and intended to reduce speeds, but in terms of whether it's whether the speeds exiting the roundabouts are going to be equivalent, or speeds of vehicles exiting are going to be in compliance with the speed limits posted speed coming out. I mean, at this point, you've got the roundabouts seem to be effective in reducing speeds in comparison to, I mean, no treatment. So I really don't have a good answer for necessarily have a good answer for that question. I don't know at the moment.
I do thank you for answering all the questions. We sure had a lot for this particular webinar, so thank you to both you and Kay for answering all of those that we had. If for anyone did not get their question answered, as we are going to go ahead and close the website, at the end here I will provide you with email addresses to reach out to either myself or the speakers so we can try and get your questions answered for you afterwards. I'm going to move us forward in our webinar and go ahead and get us closed out. Excuse all the clicking. For today's webinar, we hope that to achieve our goal, you have learned to explain the steps for setting a posted speed limit, to name the key elements to consider when setting a posted speed limit, and to list design treatments for rural high-speed to low-speed transition zones. As I did mention at the beginning, we do have several slides worth of speed resources available to you. So I hope you'll download that PDF in the bottom left-hand corner so you'll have all of these links. The very first slide has the links to both NCHRP reports that were presented on today. You've already seen those earlier in the webinar as well. There's also a noteworthy speed management practices guide that was done by ITE and a New Zealand speed management guide that is very useful as well as the older guide for speed management for a manual for local and rural road owners that is still available as well. On our second slide, we have several websites that you could take a look at. They all have multiple resources available for speed. So I gave you the full website to find their speed resources. We have federal highways. We have Road to Zero's Doubling Down on What Works. There is a speed management topic here. ITE's speed resources. There's a new Teens in Speeding Breaking the Deadly Cycle report that was done by GHSA, as well as a webinar that was held in lieu of the GHSA annual meeting on speeding, diverse approaches to achieving culture change. And lastly, there are a few additional new safety resources, not necessarily on speed, but ones that I just want to bring your attention to. So Federal Highway has provided a 3 approaches to safety video, site-specific, systematic, and systemic. So it explains the differences between those 3 different approaches. FHWA and ITE have also released a Safe Systems Strategic Plan. And NHTSA has recently released their 10th edition of the Countermeasures That Work. So all of those links are available here for you as well. If you are following along in our 6-part series, our next part, Part 5 on safe roads, will be held on Tuesday, November 30th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern. The registration for that should go live next week, so please check back on the Rural Safety Center website to go ahead and get registered for that one. Part 6 on post-crash care will be available in December. November's webinar, so you have a little bit more context on that, will feature speakers from the Forward program, focus on reducing rural roadway departures, from South Carolina DOT talking about their rural road safety program, and from Alabama LTOP talking about their STEP UC, or Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian in Underserved Communities program, and ways that you can use those in your area. Again, if you have any questions related to this presentation, you can go ahead and email Kay or Darren. Their emails are available on the screen right now, or you can contact us at the National Center for Rural Road Safety at info@ruralsafetycenter.org, or the phone number listed here. I do see again that there was a question on the date for Part 5. So again, that date for Part 5 will be Tuesday, November 30th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern, and the link for registering for that will come out within the next week. So thank you again, Kay and Darren. We appreciate you helping us out today talking about your reports on safe speeds. Everybody have a great day.